Ladies and gentlemen, if you would please be seated. And for those of you that are sitting over by the posters and flyers, there are a couple of seats available, so please come and join us if you would like. We have about 2 minutes to start, so I'm just going to say right here, this is the most beautiful day that we could have had. 2 days ago when it poured down rain, right? God continually reinforces that He's always with us. Thank you, Lord. All right, is everybody ready and seated and comfortable? Well, God bless you. This is a beautiful day to remember such an amazing day in America's history. My name is Chaplain Mindy Russell. I am the Law Enforcement Chaplaincy Sacramento and the California Chaplains Corps chaplain. And you will be hearing from some great people today to keep the memory of 9/11 alive. Just a couple of things that if you have any questions or from the speakers, they will be around afterwards to just talk to them. But this is a day that we must remember. We will never forget. So with that, I'm going to ask all of you that can, if you would stand. We are going to recognize the presentation of the colors, and then I'm going to have the national anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance spoken. So if you all would stand, honor guard from the Sacramento Police Department, would you come forward to present the colors? Paulette, would you please say the Pledge of Allegiance?
Present forward.
To the Republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now Bill Rios will sing the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed, and the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, all the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bomb bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of all brave?
Order, form. Over, form.
What a great opportunity to just reinvest in our country with the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, Paulette, and the National Anthem. Beautiful, Phil. I'm going to ask if Chaplain Doug Garside would come to do the opening ceremony and vocation.
Let us pray. Father, where two or three are gathered, you are there. Lord, we welcome you among us today and celebrate the gift of life you have lavished upon each of us. We acknowledge your presence and ask for your blessing on this gathering. We ask that you would open our ears so that we may hear your voice. Open our minds so that we may receive your wisdom. Open our spirits so that we may know your guidance. And open our hearts so that we may receive your love. And may we never forget September 11th, 2001. We ask all this in the glorious name of Jesus Christ. And all God's people said, amen.
You may be seated. So our first guest speaker is Eric Durla, the Sacramento City Councilman from District 6.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Let's give a round of applause to our veterans and our affiliated councils and all of us who put this together. The sun is out today. We've got family here today. We're living in a different, celebrating this in a different way. But one thing that's for sure is we're all here to remember a great sacrifice. 20 years ago, I can't believe how fast it's gone. And my wife and I were talking about what happened 20 years ago. We have two boys, a new one, 2 months old. So, this morning was the night shift. So if I seem a little sleepy, it's because he was still up last night. But she was recalling that during 9/11, she was at school at the University of NYU in New York, and during that time, she had grown up in California, but her family's from in New York. But she remembers that experience, and she was wondering, will our future children, or the future grandchildren, recognize and understand that law? We went last year without this personal celebration, and so it's great to see everyone back here. On the way over here, it was interesting to also hear the comments of our president, the 43rd President George W. Bush, talk about the impacts of terrorism and what it left as a mark to all of us. And also, what it brought to us as a form of unity, to making sure that we recognize as Americans that from whatever walk of life that we come through, that we build off of each other, and that we support each other. And most importantly, not through the times that we have great wealth and success, but through the times of great challenges. And the loss and tragedy that we had 20 years, not just to the people who were in our towers, but our servicemen and women who went in there to fight and help and save many of them who were there. I see many of them here today. Let's give a thank you and a round of applause to our firefighters, our police officers, and many of our first responders, and those who also provided mutual aid at the time. Not only in the towers were there American citizens and many long-time generations of Americans, but in those towers also were many immigrants and also refugees who were service sector workers who were working in those buildings. And so the important recognition that everyone was harmed, and the impact to our country was that people who were impacted by that came from all over the world. And the message and the tyranny rippled across our entire globe about how this could have happened. Today, we want to make sure, and I know in my family, we want to make sure that we never forget the sacrifice that was given, and also, since that time, the sacrifice that our members of the armed forces and our National Guard have given to fight back against terrorism, to fight back against that tyranny, away, abroad, and at home here. I do want to first thank our servicemen and women who are here today. Let's give them a big round of applause. For our veterans who have served in many past wars, I know I've learned a lot from many of them, such as Phil Rios, but also I want to thank most recently our veteran Art Aleman and our former commander Norma Christensen from my own neighborhood here, from the VFW Post 57. I'll take the privilege here to thank them. Because after their service, they continue to serve and be engaged, and particularly during this pandemic, they continue to be engaged. But most importantly, I also want to make sure that we do not forget so many of the young men and women who are coming back, fighting against tyranny, fighting against terrorism around the globe. And when I've seen some of them come back, I think back how I was recently at college at that same age, and now I look at them and I see that they look so young. And I want to make sure we do not forget them as well as they come back. We must help them, I think, in this biggest time in need. With that, I just want to thank everyone here for continuing to remember the sacrifice, to remember that we as a country, as a community, must work together during the most difficult of times. We're living through probably one of those most challenging times right now. I want to thank you. God bless America. God bless Sacramento. God bless all our survivors and veteran men and women. Thank you very much.
This could not have been done today without my next guest speaker. I could introduce you to him, to you, as the CEO of the California State Fair Exposition. I could tell you all of the great things that he has done for this community, but I want to introduce him as my friend, Rick Kipling.
Well, thank you all for taking time, not only taking time, but investing time. Investing time to remember, so as Councilman Guerra said, that we should never forget. First of all, I'd like to thank all the dignitaries that are here today, and I'd like to introduce you to them one by one. If you would please turn and look to your left, and now turn and look to your right. You have met the most important people here today, and chose to be here and sit by you, so thank you for that. In all seriousness, so we do have a number of elected officials from the City of Sacramento, County of Sacramento, also representatives from Senate and Assembly for the State of California, and federal representatives from Congress as well. We also have a representative here today on behalf of Governor Newsom, who had other commitments. But for those electeds that are here, thank you for being here. For the men and women that have served our veterans organization to help put this together, thank you for being here. For those that are currently wearing uniforms, thank you for all that you've done and all you continue to do. Briefly, what you see behind me is large I-beams that were selected in 2001 by members of the California State Fair Board who went to New York, who saw the 12-story pile of steel rubble. Understand there was almost no concrete, almost no glass, simply because of the heat of the fire. When you look at the beams, you'll notice there's almost no concrete left. That's how intense the jet fuel burns. From that 12-story pile of rubble, members of the Fair Board selected these I-beams. They're placed on a train with individual donations. These I-beams were trained into the community of Roseville. Merrick Steel Construction met us there with semi-trucks and made the decision to actually cut this beam in half because it was too heavy to travel on California roads on semi-trucks. So our friends at Merrick, thank you. They fabricated this. When you see the size of these beams, this is the largest 9/11 memorial exhibit in the western United States. The beams are just, it's hard to describe for those of you that are watching that aren't actually with us today. To my left, your right, is an exploding sphere made out of solid granite, and it floats on pressurized water. The name of everyone who perished on September 11, 2001 is permanently engraved in this floating sphere. Behind the floating sphere are the two reflective towers, are an image of the World Trade Center. Most importantly, it's a reflection. As you look into the tower, you not only see your face and the beauty of nature around you, but over your shoulder, you see the devastation of the beams, and you also see the reflection of the ball with the names engraved forever, for eternity. To my far right, to your left, there's a symbolic airplane wing, which is representative of the flight that went down in Pennsylvania and the crew members that lost their life, as well as the brave Americans that worked to keep that flight from striking another target. Back to the far corner, you see the military flags. There is a replica of the Pentagon, also in stone, in granite. Engraved in that are the names of the men and women at the Pentagon who also perished when that Pentagon was attacked, and also the name of the flight crew and the passengers who were on that plane. And then to my left, your right, is a series of airline bells. You will hear those a little bit later on, and we will be ringing those for you. But this exhibit is here because the people in California came forward. They put together the funding for it. They created this California State Fair 9/11 Memorial Plaza, and all this was done with private donations. So that nonprofit still exists. You can go to the Expo, California State Fair website, find out information if you would like to support. But it's basically, and what you'll hear throughout today, this was done not as a celebration, but as a memorial, as a remembrance for those who gave their innocent life, for the heroes that rushed into the buildings, and then after the fact, people from California, our own Sacramento Fire Department, police, etc., went to New York in the rescue effort. And that's one thing that Congress did in 2001. They voted overwhelmingly to declare September 11th as Patriot Day in America going forward. So the day is actually Patriot Day. If it's a celebration of anything, it's a celebration of the unity that came about in America because we suffered such a tragedy. So just as we sent people to New York to help them, states around us, thank you for coming to California and helping us with our fires, our earthquakes, and other catastrophes that we have. But that's what binds us together as a people. So thank you for being here. Maybe, and the chaplain to your organization, thank you, and you're doing a great job against me. I'm going to step aside.
I'm not sure if you all were aware, but did you see the name come over while you were talking? Wow, and that is actually needs to be the symbol of hope now, not a symbol of destruction. So we are going to have a couple more things that are so meaningful for this day. Another dear friend that I get to introduce, everybody's my friend, okay? Let's just say that. But I'd love to introduce Sue Frost, Sacramento County Supervisor, District 4.
Freedom, yes.
Good morning, everyone. First, I want to thank Cal Expo and all of those generous souls who created this beautiful memorial space. It's so peaceful here, and when I think back on 9/11, and I remember that morning, my husband came into my bedroom and said, "Sue, you're not going to believe this." We ran to my office upstairs. He said a plane flew into one of the towers, and as I got to my office, the second plane was hitting the next tower, and we stood in awe and amazement. The world stood by, stunned to see that something like this could happen in America. And so the word terror comes to mind because I think about those people who were in that tower and were not able to get out. I think about the ones who acted quickly and led many out. I think about those who ran in, the first responders who ran in, not thinking about their own safety or time or consequences, just doing what they do, saving lives. And that brings me to the word courage. What is courage? Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the ability to act in spite of your fear. And I am so grateful for the so many people on that day that had courage, but I'm also grateful, and I want to acknowledge our frontline responders today. This was like 20 years ago. It's hard to believe. I can't believe I'm 20 years older. And we said at that time we will never forget, and we haven't forgotten. And we've taken all the most important lessons from that day to try to hold them in our heart and live as good Americans. But the frontline workers today are just every bit as courageous as they were on that day. And I just want to especially give a shout out and a thank you to our firemen, our first responders, our hospital workers who are doing so much to fight, not only for American medical freedom, but for our lives and our health and our safety. And so I just would like to recognize them today. The world is counting on America. They're watching us. They're watching us, and they're counting on us to help fight for freedom all over the world. To be free is not something that just comes to you. You know, we have our Constitution, we have our inalienable rights, but to be free, you have to exercise it. And so today I want to leave us with a thought of, you know, we said we will never forget, and we know we won't ever forget that day. We pray for them, for those who walked through the terror and lost their innocent lives, but we also pray for all of us that carry on as free Americans. Thank you.
And now we also will have from Congressman Amibera, Matthew Cicado, who will be representing.
Good morning. Thank you to Veterans Bill for today. It's a moment of the day we stand still 20 years later. From New York Fire Department Friar Judge, who was the first certified fatality on the ground, after rushing to the site to pray for the dead and help the wounded. To the red bandana worn by Wells Crowther, who carried somebody 17 floors down to turn around and head back up that flight of stairs, never to be seen from again alive. John Patrick O'Neill, who in 1993 as an FBI agent helped capture the mastermind of the World Trade Center bombing, only to be killed while directing evacuations from the South Tower as he served as the World Trade Center security chief. Who can forget the iconic photo of Ladder 118 racing across the Brooklyn Bridge to certain doom? 6 firefighters that day, never coming home. As the carnage unfolded in New York City, the members of our nation's military were thrust into the fight as the E-ring of the Pentagon collapsed. Personal cars were used as ambulances, and Walter Reed Army Medical Center was filled with the wounded, a telling foreshadow of the next 20 years. A plane of strangers united for one cause, to fight back against their terrorist hijackers. Their battle ended bravely in the field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Those few hours when we lost so many, the single moment when life changed for everybody in the United States. Flags were hung in unity, and family members were hugged tight. I joined many others searching for understanding as we grasped the unthinkable. As this twisted steel smoldered almost 3,000 miles away, I walked into a South Sacramento Army recruiting station. The feeling in Sacramento in the immediate aftermath was, yes, of despair and grief, but we had something else. We had the feeling that was matched in all communities around the United States: determination and unity. I enlisted for my family and for this community, and so did many others who served there that day. I mentioned the service in Iraq and Afghanistan as the wars are ending. Thousands of brave men and women, native and foreign born, willingly sacrificed their youth and in some cases their lives for their freedoms. In the cities of Kabul, Baghdad, Kandahar, Herat, Tikrit, and many others. They've done so for one reason. America asked. Lady Liberty had a view in Lower Manhattan that day, and tears welled in her eyes. But people stood up, from the firefighters and first responders who rushed into the building, to the now 20 years later, the people that still stand up and willingly wear the uniform, the flag of these United States. That is why we're here today. So as we contemplate this day in our lives and where we were, I close with an ask. Take a moment. Take the next moment to think, what can you do for somebody who lost their life that day? What can you do that can continue to lead to the ideals of which America is here for? The same miracle will happen as it happened on September 12th. The sun will rise in the United States. It'll shine on our faces, and it'll continue to do so as long as we uphold the values that are now etched and granted across New York City, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the Pentagon, and now around the world. We can do this, Sacramento. We can come together. We can live by a set of ideals. And the words of Todd Beamer, Flight 93 in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Let's roll.
That's what we need to hear. Let's roll. Let's do this. Okay, so now we're doing a presentation of the governor's degree by the Cal Vet Deputy Sochi Rodriguez Morello. Thank you. Yes, President.
First, good morning. Our immense gratitude at Cal Vet and from the governor to our first responders, our veterans, our families who gave all, who continue to give, and to the civilians we lost on 9/11. This 11th of September 2021 marks 20 years since the horrific Al-Qaeda terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center and Pentagon. The events of 9/11 claimed the lives of 3,000 men and women, including 29 Californians, and irrevocably changed the world as we knew it. Every year since, we have observed September 11 as Patriotic Day to commemorate those who perished in the attacks and honor the courageous first responders, men and women from all walks of life, who took action to protect others, many losing their lives or suffering long-term injuries and death from their service, and health impacts from their service. This Patriot Day, we reflect on the past 20 years, remembering those we lost and honoring the service members who answered our nation's call in the aftermath of the attacks, including the heroes we tragically lost last month in Afghanistan. On this somber anniversary, I have ordered all flags on state buildings to be flown at half-staff, Let us continue to make a commitment to never forgive and uphold the patriotic values of equality, opportunity, and freedom. Now therefore I, Gavin Newsom, Governor of the State of California, do hereby proclaim September 11, 2021 as Patriot Day. Signed, Governor Gavin Newsom.
And now it's with pleasure to introduce to each and every one of you the main speaker, Gil Sandler. He is a civilian aide to the Secretary of Army.
Thank you, Chaplain. I want to begin first by thanking 4 people who made this event possible. Ms. Josie Lee, the marketing coordinator for Cal Expo, in the back there. Mr. Frank Goringer in Pride Industries, where you, Frank, right here. Mr. Phil Rios from the California Mexican American Veteran Memorial Foundation, and finally Rick Pickering, the CEO of Cal Expo. As you've heard, each and every one of you can tell me exactly where you were when you learned of the attacks. Somebody called you and said, turn on your TV. You called somebody else and said, turn on your TV. All through that day, you spoke with friends and relatives to make sense of what you saw that day. I was in a building directly across. Excuse me, I haven't spoken on the anniversary in a number of years, so just bear with me. We were in a conference room on the west side of our building when at 8:46 we heard a high-pitched scream followed by a tremendous boom, and our building shook. We had no idea what happened, but when we looked south at the plaza below us, we saw dozens of office workers running toward the Hudson, but looking up over their shoulders as they ran at the North Tower. A few seconds later, somebody came into our conference room and said, the World Trade Center is on fire. We ran to the east side of our building and looked up to a scene of utter horror. Thick, ugly smoke poured out of the broken windows in the North Tower above us. Office workers reached out through those broken windows to escape the smoke and flames behind them. Only minutes later, as we were trying to figure out what it was that had caused the devastation above us, we saw a plane come in from our right side, hit the south tower, and project an enormous fireball out the north side of the building. What the rest of the world saw on TV, we felt in our bodies. The weight, the speed, and the explosive power of that jet fuel that hit the south tower had a force of 40 tons of TNT. Our building shook, and it moved a seismic needle 34 miles up the Hudson. As we all know, when we're faced with mortal danger, we do one of 3 things. We flee, we freeze, or we fight. I saw all 3 in evidence in the next few minutes. We thought we were next. We all fled for our stairwell, but I ran around the floor to see if there were any stragglers, and I found a dining room worker slouched against the wall, sobbing hysterically. I said, you have to move. She said, I can't. So I stood her up, and I said, you're going to feel my hands on your shoulders, and we'll walk to the stairs and walk down. When we entered the stairwell, dozens of workers from above were clambering down the stairs. I yelled, slow down, because I thought if one of us fell, we'd be crushed by the people coming down from above us. When we finally reached the street, 19 floors below, we were met with a scene of total chaos. People running, sirens and horns blaring, burning debris falling all around us. Suddenly people started screaming, and I turned toward the direction they were looking. and I saw office workers jumping off the towers. All of us on the streets were in a state of shock. We simply couldn't comprehend what we were seeing and what we were experiencing. I went to a fireman and I said, "What can I do to help?" And he said, "Go to Bellevue. They'll need blood there." As I talked to him, dozens of firemen walked past us, laden with gear, and filed into both towers. As I started to head north, I suddenly heard a third aircraft behind me, and I expected another deadly hit. But in a split second, my ears, my chest, my head were consumed by a roar, and I looked up. And I saw an F-15. He screamed by us overhead. He turned down the Hudson River. He was looking for a fight, and he was looking to protect us from the streets below. At that moment, I knew we were safe, and it was the first time in my life I understood what it meant to have the military at our backs. The attacks on our nation that day were heinous acts of terrorism. I understand what terror is. When I got to Bellevue Hospital, the nurse told me my pulse was 120. The physical effects of terror go away quickly, but the psychic effects never go away. I saw the worst of humanity that day. I witnessed evil face to face, but I also saw the very best of humanity. Rescue workers risking and giving their lives to save people they did not know. Over the years, I took 3 paths in response to 9/11. I wanted to control that morning. I did not want that morning to control me. First, I worked to understand the forces that gave rise to 9/11. I also learned what had happened to my own body and my brain. And third, I found a path to respond to the sacrifices I witnessed. When we went to a war in Iraq, I adopted a soldier and then a platoon, and then I adopted the 4,300 soldier Dagger Brigade in Schweinfurt, Germany. And I and my community in Connecticut supported them through 3 deployments. As a result of those activities, I was asked to become a civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army. And we look out for the interests of soldiers and families. I've served in that role for 13 years. Our first responders in our military swear an oath to protect and uphold the Constitution, and they fulfill that role by putting their lives on the line. I believe that our responsibility as civilians is to exercise all the rights of the Constitution and support those who risk their lives to defend it. We must vote and protect that right to vote. We must use the freedom of the press to study the issues that confront our country. They are complex, and an ignorant population is easily manipulated. We must use our freedom of the press to voice our informed opinions and to hold our elected officials accountable for their decisions. Most importantly, when we send our troops into harm's way.
Amen.
Finally, we must care for and respect those who risk their lives on our behalf, and for the families who so steadfastly support them. The costs of 9/11 have continued to this day, with the workers who spent weeks searching for victims on the smoldering ruins, to the troops who were sent to the source of those attacks, and to those 13 troops who were killed only a few weeks ago at Kabul airport. There is also a cost to 9/11 from racism. I don't believe that we were attacked by a religion or an ethnicity. My study has taught me that 9/11 arose from hatred, a hatred that was bred from ignorance, isolation, and intolerance. 9/11 itself fanned the flames of racism here in the United States. Racism also bred by ignorance and intolerance. We must combat that racism every day and call it out when we see it. 20 years after 9/11, I continue to be inspired by those who serve our nation. Yesterday, I went up on the line at the Dixie Fire. north of us to thank a new generation of firefighters, guardsmen, and combat soldiers fighting those fires. Some of them hadn't even been born on 9/11. I want to end my remarks today by recognizing and asking for your support for a new group of people who place themselves in harm's way on behalf of Americans. For the past 20 years, our military in Afghanistan relied on local Afghan allies to help us navigate local language, customs, and terrain. The Taliban have been retaliating against those allies by hunting them and assassinating them. For the last 5 months, I've been working with a committed group of civilians and veterans to help evacuate and resettle these wonderful allies. As Americans, we now have a responsibility to help these Afghans forge new lives in America and become active participants and contributors to our society. For these Afghans have risked and sacrificed their lives on behalf of Americans, just as our first responders did 20 years ago. Thank you for your time today. God bless our first responders. God bless our military. God bless all their families. And God bless America.
Many of you do not know the sequence of what happened starting when the first plane hit the first tower. But I'm going to ask if Paulette Spade Rios, VFW, Code 667 Auxiliary Member, a supporter of the Wounded Warrior Project, and 55 years supporting the Paralyzed Victims of America, to share the sequence of 9/11.
Sequence of events. Tuesday morning, September 11th, 2001. 8:46 a.m. American Airlines Flight 11 crashes into floors 93 through 99 of the World Trade Center North Tower, killing 92 passengers and crew members. We're waiting for the bells. (9:03 a.m.) United Airlines Flight 175 crashes into floors 75 to 85 of World Trade Center South Tower, killing 65 passengers and crew members. American Airlines 77 crashes into western facade of the Pentagon, Washington, D.C., killing 64 passengers and crew members, plus 125 inside the Pentagon, and wounding hundreds of military and civilian personnel. 9:59 a.m. South Tower of World Trade Center collapses, killing approximately 600 citizens, New York City Port Authority, New York City police officer, and New York City firefighters. 10:07 a.m. United Airlines Flight 93 impacts Merced County, Pennsylvania, killing 44 passengers and crew members. 10:28 a.m. North Tower of World Trade Center collapses, killing approximately 1,692 citizens. New York Port Authority, New York City police officers, and New York City firefighters. 200 citizens chose to jump to escape a horrible fiery death. 200 souls perished while trapped in elevators. We gather here today to give honor and remembrance to those innocent souls who lost their lives in this horrific attack on our beloved nation. We ask that all citizens pause during our busy day. Pray for those who still suffer, for our brave men and women in our armed forces serving in harm's way, and also for our public safety first responders who run towards danger to save, protect, and serve. Finally, to educate the younger generations of the significance of that mourning, not to dwell on the tragedy of that day, but to ensure that all who died 20 years ago, lest they not be forgotten.
There have been many, many things that have been shared today. They've asked me to briefly share with my experience as a first responder to first responders on that day. As for the 11 years prior to that, I trained to be a first responder to first responders in any type of tragedy, professionally or personally, to their families as well as them. That's what we do. And so that day when I got the first call, it was a sad, sober call from Washington, D.C., but it was a call that said, there was an accident, Chaplain Mindy, can you get out to New York City? You got 4 hours to get to the airport. And I said, of course, because that's what we do. And I grabbed my go bag and I looked at my husband, and we started preparing for what that day was going to be like in Sacramento. After 2 long months of disasters that made nationwide news. And then the second plane hit. And when I left that day, I left my husband as if this was the last time I would ever see him. It was sobering. But that's what we do. And everybody that has ever said what first responders do, they take on that burden, that sacrifice to be able to serve their community and their country. But we as the first responders to the first responders, we serve those who serve. And that's what we do. And when I went with the search and rescue team, we were the only airplane in the sky authorized by the President of the United States. And that was sobering. And those men would come and sit next to me on this huge Galaxy 5 with fighters on either side of us, getting us to New York City. And it was unimaginable. In fact, there's a saying that says, you will never rise to what you expect you'll do. You will always fall back to what you mentally prepare. None of us were prepared for that day. None of us. But every one of those men said the same thing. I was thinking, why are we doing this? We could be killed in New York City, or worse yet, we could be in New York City and Sacramento is hit. And we're leaving our families. But that's what we do. We go. And we go. And for the 16 days that I was there at Ground Zero, I am telling you, I heard hundreds and hundreds of stories. I heard first responders that told me about their friend, and they should have been on that bus, they should have been on that plane, they should have been in those towers. I heard first responders talk about how their whole department was gone. And I heard from victim after victim when we were assigned the Family Assistance Center for 5,000 victims and 1,200 homicide investigators and hundreds of spontaneous volunteers that came and said, we just want to help. Because that's what we do. And I got to stand on the side of the road and be there, asked to pray for everybody that came out of that tower and other buildings that day, to pray for the men that stood in dignity and with respect for that body that was draped with the American flag as they were escorted to the coroner's office. Because that's what we did. And then I prayed. I prayed over boots. I prayed over paper. I prayed over clothes. Because there was no bodies to be found. Because that's what we do. And yet, what we do best is provide a light in the darkness. Your first responders that are dedicated to your first responders have one mission in mind, is to keep them doing what they do. And how do they do that best? Is to have someone that they can share their horrors with and tell them with the sincerity and with all the love we can muster up, you got this. We need you. Keep going. It has not changed. No, September 11th, no, it has not changed. Today, 20 years later, we Americans are still united and can be united, just like what Bill said. Today, we look back at 9/11, and I ask you one more time to look at 9/12. Because although 9/11 was devastating, the horror, the evil, the pain, and the anguish, that's not where they are today. And we stopped that the next day when, quite frankly, I'm going to quote one of my wonderful police officers, "Not in this country, hell no!" Yeah, Sarge, I can say that. We locked arms. We weren't any religion. We weren't any culture. We were not black, white, red, or yellow. We were red, white, and blue. And when we stood shoulder to shoulder and held on to each other's hand, nobody was a stranger. Nobody. And we all did what we had to do. And we can still do it today. Bring it back. Bring 911 back so we can go to 912. And remember how this country came together. One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and life for all of us. We got this spirit. Yes? Yes. We can scream what Todd Beamer said. Let's roll. Let's stand. Let's do this. And don't ever forget those men and women that had no idea when they got up in the morning that they weren't going to go home that night. And those men and women that saw all those things, may God bless their memories and covered it over with the help and the love that we can demonstrate to them. So I'm going to tell you what we do. You do. It's like what Gil said. He did something. We all have an opportunity to do something. You might not go to a ground zero ever again, I pray to God. But we have the wildfires and the hurricanes and the tornadoes and all kinds of things that every one of us here today can do something. Let's get rolling. Let's do something. And let's thank God for America. God bless you, and God bless America. Seated as we have our wonderful Sacramento Police Department, Lieutenant Josh Dowling, to come up, and he will introduce the reading of the names.
Good morning, everyone. Not only do I have to follow Chaplain Mindy, but bagpipes, so give me that. I would be remiss first. I'm speaking on behalf of the Sacramento Police Department, and we're going to be have some prepared words for the sacrifice of the New York Police Department. But I would be remiss and negligent if I did not first recognize every first responder that sacrificed that day and continues to sacrifice today. Our firefighters, our soldiers, our law enforcement, our healthcare providers, everyone. Anyone that answers the call, put themselves in harm's way, visible and invisible, to help the citizens of our great country, should be respected. Give your thanks. Round of applause. Thank you. It's fitting that Corporal Claire Henderson and I are here to say these words. We represent a span of 20 years of law enforcement. I was on patrol in our North Command as an officer in September 11, 2001. Corporal Claire Henderson, 20 years later, is on patrol in Sacramento as a responding officer. That gives me joy and hope that we continue to have young people to answer the call every day. And it's a really special thing. At this very moment, on September 11th, 2001, New York City came under terrorist attack. Almost 3,000 people perished that day. The New York City Police Department, along with the New York City Fire Department and thousands of other first responders, traveled to the World Trade Center buildings in a show of strength and courage that earned us the respect of the world. 23 brave members of the New York City Police Department did not return from ground zero. We honor them daily by defending our American way of life for which they died on that day. They, and each of you, personify what was best about that city, this country, and our deeds every day. As we observe the anniversary of these tragic events on September 11, 2001, take pride in knowing that history will remember the New York City Police Department and how they demonstrated the highest principles of service and humanity in the response that day. All first responders did. May events never require us to do so again. But I know in my heart that if a challenge like that is faced, and it is being faced each day, whether it be through a wildfire, crimes of violence, that we will have people to respond in kind, and we will be ready. At this time, I'll introduce Corporal Claire Henderson, who will now read the roll call of the members killed in the line of duty on September 11, 2001.
Again, just as Lieutenant Dobson just said, we are only representing the few of the New York City Police Department. But again, there were over 400 first responders that lost their life that day. And if only we could have the time to read every single one of their names. But today will be the 23 officers that gave their life. And hopefully they can represent all those others that are not being represented today individually. Sergeant John Coughlin. Sergeant Michael Curtin. Sergeant Rodney Gillis. Sergeant Timothy Roy. Detective Claude Richards. Detective Joseph Vigiano. Police Officer Vincent Dans. Police Officer Jerome Dominguez. Police Officer John Dialara. Police Officer Stephen Driscoll. Police Officer Mark Ellis. Police Officer Robert Fazio. Police Officer Ronald Flipper. Police Officer Thomas Lagarn. Police Officer James Leahy. Police Officer Brian McDonald. Police Officer John Perry. Police Officer Glenn Petit. Police Officer Moira Smith. Police Officer Ramon Suarez. Police Officer Paul Halsey. Police Officer Santo Valentin. And Police Officer Walter Weaver. Rest in peace.
Thank you very much. If you look to my left, you'll see a series of banners. On those banners, it says, "Saluting our heroes. California remembers the victims of 9/11. You'll see law enforcement, first responders, public safety. Earlier when we began this, I asked you to turn to your left and turn to your right and meet the most important people in attendance today. I misspoke. as we conclude this, I would once again direct your attention to the floating sphere that has 2,996 names engraved on it. I think we would agree that their names are the most important dignitaries here today. Thank you all for being in attendance. Chaplain Mindy, outstanding words, wonderful job as usual. Just looking at the audience and seeing the amount of tears that are there, knowing that this is on Facebook, broadcasting live in New York City as we speak. I'm old enough that I remember a Woody Guthrie song. And this land is your land, this land is my land. From where? From California to where? To the New York Islands. And in this case, to Virginia and to Pennsylvania and back and forth across the country. Thank you to men and women who serve and continue to serve. Thank you for our elected officials that joined us here today. Thank you to the folks in New York. We share in your tragedy, but we also share in this day of Patriot Day. So thank you for what you've done and continue to do to remind us of what our great nation is all about. One nation under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all, which is an ideal that we continue to strive for. We shoot short so many times, but we continue to move forward. Thank you.
So we will conclude with the Law Enforcement Chaplaincy Sacramento Law Enforcement Chaplain North House. Thank you all for being here, and make sure you sign our guest book and the banners.
It's one minute. I want to thank you all for being here, the attendees, everybody who's come here to remember 9/11. You've heard it many times now that we should never forget. And I think those of us here now won't, because it's such an impact on so many. I want to thank all the officers that are here, law enforcement, firefighters, military. I want to thank you so much. Military continued that fight after 9/11. Matter of fact, the enlistment rate went through the roof. So we thank you for that. I want to say a prayer to close, and as Supervisor Cross said, it was 20 years ago. Lord, yes, sorry. Lord, we thank you for the freedoms we have in our country. You, Lord, are here at our beginning, and until you're here, despite all that's happening around us and around the world, you're here now. Lord, we ask for your protection over our law enforcement officers, our firefighters, and all of our active duty military personnel as they carry on our fight for freedom. Thank you, Lord, for your many blessings. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. If you would, don't forget to sign the guest book that's out there. There's 2 banners at the entrance part of the archives. Please don't forget to sign the guest book. Thanks.